Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about increasing online class engagement with active learning. So let's go ahead and get started. So to begin our goals for today, we're going to be going over strategies to increase learner engagement and deepen student learning for an online class. And that's where we think active learning does such a great job. How we're going to get there? We're going to start by defining what active learning is. We're going to go over some types of synchronous activities that you could do in your online class, and then we'll kind of button it up by summarizing the whole thing. So what is active learning? Definition. Active learning is any approach to instruction in which all students are asked to engage in the learning process. So the biggest thing here is that students are actively engaged in their own learning. So they actually have to be doing something with it. This is in contrast to passive learning, where they're just listening and being lectured to. This active learning actually has them being part of the process. So some characteristics of active learning. The instructor role shifts from lecturer to facilitator. So you're not talking the whole time, you're actually interacting. Students are actively involved with their own learning, so they're actually doing something. Activities can be in large group or small group that involve writing, discussing, problem solving, and reflecting. Now I want you to look at the actual things that they will be doing. So these are the main things that you want to be looking at when you're thinking of active learning. So they're writing, discussing, problem solving, reflecting. You don't see listening on this list. Even though they are, that's not going to be considered a main active learning activity. That's part of the process. But they actually have to be doing something to be considered active learning. So in all these activities, students are engaged with the content. So here are a few active learning strategies that you might use. So you see it goes from simple to complex, and it has some examples of some things that you could do. Pause for reflection. So if you're asking questions in the middle of your lecture, you want to make sure that you give enough time for your students to be able to think about what you're asking. Large group discussions, that's kind of a big back and forth. Self-assessment, where you have students reflect on their own learning. Peer reviews, where they kind of, where students grade each other, they kind of talk to each other about each other's work. So they get to really reflect on someone else's perspective on something, get ideas, and give feedback. Case studies are real-world examples that they could bring in. Interactive lecture, brainstorming, jigsaw discussion, which Jessica and I have talked about for a while about what exactly is jigsaw discussion. And that's where different groups are in charge of learning different parts of the content, and then come together to discuss each section of the content. So they're kind of teaching each other. They're becoming experts in one thing and then teaching it to the other groups, which is a really great practice. Active review sessions, simulations or games, inquiry learning, and experiential learning. So now, how can we design an active learning experience? So let's look at some synchronous activities. Online synchronous strategies. So when you think of online synchronous strategies, which is what you would normally do in a classroom, you can kind of break it down to three things. Live sessions, your faculty online office hours, where you'll have to teach them one-on-one, and group work mediation, when you have groups and you have to kind of help out with any type of situation that might arise, or actually go over content. So for this part, we're going to go over some live session strategies. And here are some things to think about. You could have predetermined questions with reflection time, just like we saw on the chart in the previous slide. In-session polling, breakout sessions for student-to-student interaction, and flipped classroom activities. Now, flipped classroom activities, of course, is when students come prepared with either readings that they have done, videos, research, anything that you would have had them do outside of the classroom time or the synchronous time to come prepared for your online session. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's get a little into it. So here we kind of thought of the practical guide. We created a practical guide to active learning and what that might look like. So first, a few things. So one, you're going to be using backward design, like we've talked about in the past. We're going to start with the outcomes first, know what we want to get out of the session, and then work backwards. We're going to do something called chunking of content, where we kind of segment big important pieces of content and then do an active learning activity so that we could kind of make sure they're interacting with each important piece of the content. And then you want to also think about timing. Where in the session are you going to be including these? Is it to start off a discussion? Is it in the middle of a lecture? Is it at the conclusion of activity? So just think about where you place these different types of activities. This is kind of a good chart that we found that has kind of the ebb and flow of what an online session can look like. Now here it has, so it starts advanced organizing. You're figuring out exactly what you're going to do, so it's purposeful. And then here it goes right into the lecture. You start off with maybe an introduction, it goes in activity, you talk a little again, you let them work, you talk a little again, and then you summarize. Which we feel this is a really good kind of diagram of what that would look like. But now let's see what it would actually look like with an example. So in one of my grad courses, we were going over constructivism and behaviorism theories, and so I kind of use that as an example. It's not exactly what we did in the live session, but it's pretty close. So let's start with the outcome. So we're going backwards to design. If the outcome is identify behaviorism and constructivism practices in teaching, that means by here, students should be identifying. That's what I want them to leave with, so I want to make sure that I know that's the goal. So now I have to think backwards. Okay, where would I go? How would I start? How would I break up my session? First, I probably want students to come prepared with some readings of the theories, maybe watching some instructional videos that I've found that are really in tune with what I want them to bring, to learn, to come in with. Then I can start the lecture with reinforcing what they read and the videos. We could have a brief discussion about that, what they thought about it. And then we could transition into the activity with some examples. So maybe I will show a classroom that has either by text, or I could show them a video with a link that talks about or gives them a scenario of what a classroom might look like, a classroom activity, and then we could actually start discussing, or we could use in-session polling to review what they think that is. And that's a really good opportunity for them to first start initially thinking about what those theories actually look like in practice. I could continue the lecture by expanding on the theories, getting some real depth, go into it by showing, I think it would be, for this example, it's great to actually show the practical side of it if that's what you're trying to connect. So if here's the theory, here's a practice, and this is how they connect. So that's probably where you would go there. And then we get to the activity where we actually want them to be identifying. So in this case, my instructor at the time used breakout sessions where he put us into groups online, which we could see later on, and gave us scenarios. So gave us case studies kind of where we had to talk within our group, okay, which one is behaviorism, which one is an example of constructivism, and let's talk about it, because we're going to have to share out in a moment. And so you give them some time on that, depending on the nature of the activity. The time may vary, but make sure you give them enough time. And then lastly, student groups share out, explaining the thoughts, and this is where you as a facilitator can guide their conversation. If you see things that are going adrift or they're right on target, this is where you can kind of make sure their understanding is in line with what you want them to learn. And then lastly, you want to solidify their understanding by summarizing the experience. So let's review. So we have active learning. Students are actively involved in their own learning. during a live session, you might have them you want them engaged in the content. They have to be doing something, whether it be thinking about it, talking about it, writing about it, or anything. They actually have to be engaged with the content. So I hope you learned something and got something out of this, and I appreciate it. Have a great one.